It's not in the face! Thank you.
Hello and welcome to Hey, Not the Face with your host, John Nash, and your producer, me, Steffi Haynes. And today we're going to talk about UFC 309, and we are also going to talk about Jake Paul versus Mike Tyson and all the aftermath from both of those cards. But before we do that, let's check in with our guy here and see how he's been for the past few days. John, how the hell are you?
Fairly good. I don't know if you can hear. The state bird, the city bird of Los Angeles. We have a helicopter, which is parked over where I live here, and that they seem to do that a lot. I don't hear a thing. Perfect. My mic is working. So that's doing the job it's supposed to. But man, it's if you're in LA for any amount of time, you realize that it's basically a rule that a helicopter has to hover over you every third day for a good hour.
It's getting like that here in San Antonio too. Boy. So, John, before we start in with our official outline, I'm going to ask you two questions. My first question to you is, what did you think of Jake Paul versus Mike Tyson from a personal standpoint?
I mean, it was exactly what I expected. Trash. We talked about this. I wasn't planning to watch on it. I had no interest in watching that fight. I'm just not into I have nothing. I understand people like freak show fights. I understand people love, when Kimbo fought Dada 5,000. I didn't tune into that fight.
I didn't either. I
randomly walked out of a movie theater and into the back door of a bar that had McGregor versus Mayweather. So I got to see that free. I wasn't planning to watch that. So I'm just not into those types of fights. But, other people, although Bob Sapp versus Big Nog was amazing. So maybe I'm mistaken. But I had no interest in it, but so many people called me and wanted to watch it. So I had people over watching it. And that's when you realize there's one thing interesting about this fight is that I think it connected. We'll talk later about it. Connected more with the extreme casual than any fight I've ever experienced. And a lot of people had no clue what they're watching. And it's a joke now, but we all know that everybody that is not a fan of the fight business or watching fighting thought that Jake Paul was going to get killed. And you're trying to tell them, no, he's young and this guy's 58 and, almost 60. He's not going to do shit. So the two fights before, though.
Yeah.
Especially Taylor and Serrano, those were well worth it. I enjoyed those. Mm-hmm. But no one else cared about those fights. So under that event, it was an entertaining spectacle after I got the stream to work. And fortunately for me, my problems was during that first fight that I don't even know who the hell those two people were that were fighting. They were terrible. So I didn't miss much. And then I didn't realize what I did. I think is I paused it and hit play and didn't realize I was on like a 30-second delay, and that fixed everything. So my experience was much better than other people who said they couldn't watch it at all. But again, the main event was the trash pile heap that I thought it was going to be.
And here's the problem is that they finally got all their issues fixed for the main event. And so for me, I had to go back and watch Serrano Taylor because for about half the fight, it was either buffering or it looked like I had a piece of glass. Like I was looking through a rainy window, and there was a fight behind it. It was freaking awful. I hated it.
Did you go back and watch the Barrios versus Ramos fight?
I did not, but I did catch bits and pieces of it. I kept my Netflix on with the faint hope that, something would fix. And so I was able to catch bits and pieces, but I did not catch it all the way through. It's on my list, but I did watch Serrano Taylor all the way through, and that was such a great fight. And I don't have a problem with Katie winning.
No, when I was watching it, I kind of thought she did. I think, tell me if I'm wrong, but I thought Serrano was winning the beginning rounds.
Yes.
Up until the cut. And then because everybody focused on the headbutt of the cut, I think they gave her rounds when she wasn't really winning.
Yeah. And also Katie's combinations were just mounting up on Amanda too. I mean, those combinations there in those last 4 rounds were money.
I do have to admit though that the pace was so fast. I could easily be wrong because there was too much. There was so much stuff being thrown.
Yeah.
That it was really hard. It was a hard fight to keep track of because there were so many, changes of momentum. Just the multiple combinations were. But the people that were going nuts, they absolutely loved it. They should have maybe called it quits right then and said, you know what, we're canceling the main event, and everybody could have left happy.
Yeah, that would have been awesome. All right, my second question: what did you think of UFC 309?
I did not. I didn't find it that enjoyable, to tell you the truth. First of all, I went to a bar to watch it because some people wanted to see it, and I haven't seen a UFC event in a bar in like years. I think it was not an enjoyable experience. It was packed, and there was hard to watch, the noise.
Was it packed? Wait, could I ask? Was it packed because of the UFC event, or was it packed just because it was a Saturday night?
No, I think it was this bar specifically is a UFC type bar, I guess. So it was packed. And also, it's not a big bar, so it got packed quick. It's not like the huge Buffalo Wild Wings. It's just some kind of local bar that does this. So it filled up. Was not a good bar for viewing. Didn't have like wide open spaces to see stuff. There's pillars everywhere and shit. Made it that you had to find a spot and like stare at one TV. There was some entertainment all there. Chandler fight, I thought, although it was extremely one-sided, and I almost lost my mind with the back of the head strikes.
Oh my God, me too. I mean, I'm on Twitter, I'm on Blue Sky, and I'm screaming, "Fire this guy! What the hell is Peterson doing?"
I'm waiting for an explanation from some like Big John McCarthy when he does those rep breakdowns and stuff.
I can tell you what it is. He's not no nonsense. He's all nonsense.
Because I want an explanation of how that was legal.
Yeah.
But
that wasn't the only thing that he missed, though. I mean, there were fence grabs. Michael was grabbing him in the gloves. He grabbed him by the fingers and twisted his fingers to like pull him away from his chin and his neck.
But I kind of have a newfound respect for Chandler because he reminds me everybody attributes it to the Macho Man Randy Savage, but really goes back to Gorgeous George, the old saying, win if you can, lose if you must, but always cheat. And I think Chandler seems to have taken that to heart. And I got to admit, I kind of respect that.
Yeah, I don't. All I respect about Chandler is a whole lot of nothing. The thing that stands out to me the most is how he ran in the fight, that he has like no defense. His defensive posture is to run. And that sent me right over the moon to see all those pictures. All the people out there zero in on the same picture of Charles chasing down Michael Chandler, one hand on the fence to give him a little oomph.
When I saw that reminded me so much of the Chris Horodecki photo from the WEC when he's running away just before he got KO'd with the kick.
Right.
Yeah, so I had flashbacks to that.
Something else. But anyways, I guess we should actually get into our outline. I just had to hear what you thought about UFC 309. I kind of felt the same way as you. I felt like it didn't quite deliver the way it should have. But if you look at the way it was booked, we had 13 fights and 13 people were coming off losses for a huge pay-per-view for supposedly their pound for pound greatest of all time.
I mean, it was a one-fight card, basically.
It was a two-fight card because
that fight's it's still a step below the main event. But the main event went kind of how I thought it was. You have a very old Miocic who's very old. I mean, it's kind of a recreation of the previous night with Mike Tyson, just not as bad. But he was a great heavyweight, but he's old and hasn't fought for a while. And then we got exactly what I kind of expected.
You know who I felt bad for most after watching that? You. Because you had put, oh man, it's going to be bad. I'm prepared to feel sad. And when I saw that, and then when Stipe gets on the mic after, and I'm done. I'm fucking done. That's what he said. He used the F word and everything. I thought to myself, man, John's probably down in the dumps right now.
I mean, I wasn't down because I knew it was coming. You could just tell right when the fight started. He's lost it steps-wise. He is just it's like watching a guy move through underwater, slow motion.
Yeah. But you know what? Amongst all of those great wins that everybody was tweeting about last night, I think people are forgetting that one of his earliest wins in the UFC was over Phil DeFries. And Phil DeFries is the current KSW heavyweight champion. He's been long reigning. I think he's had like 2 or 3 defenses. Apparently, he's an unstoppable force right now. And Stipe holds a win over him too. So all of those great wins, I mean, and I loved what Francis did today. And the picture that he chose for that great post that he did was the one where Stipe beat him. I thought that was so cool.
Yeah, but remember, he's a scumbag, Francis.
Right, yeah.
According to certain people, he's not a good guy.
Dana says so it must be true, right?
Exactly.
Okay, so without any further ado, we are going to get into our official outline and get down to the brass tacks of a wild weekend, basically. But before we do that, we should talk about the antitrust lawsuit. Now, apparently, Rose Gracie, who is one of the people behind the Fighters Foundation, has said that some of the fighters from the league class, now remember, the league class just reached an agreement to settle for $375 million. They are afraid to take their settlement and give the lawyers their information because they're afraid of the UFC. Now, how big of a problem is this?
This is actually a little alarming because what Rose is doing is she's the Fighters Foundation, on behalf of the plaintiffs, are contacting, I think, mostly people in Portuguese and in Brazil who don't speak English. It's, because I'm not sure anybody on the attorney side speaks Portuguese. And she's reaching out to fighters to basically just convince them to contact, if you're listening, fighters, UFCclassaction.com, where you can enter your information they want from you, your name, your contact information. They have like 4 or 5 things they want from you. So you go there, you log in, you give them that information so they can stay in touch with you and then send you the claim form when the settlement is finally approved by the judge, which they're expecting in February. Sometime
John,
after that, you would get that.
Quick question on that, if I may.
Yep.
When you do that, is that private? Will anybody know that you have filled out that information other than the attorneys and the fighter?
Only the attorney side. That's confidential information between attorney-client privilege, so that they will not disclose who contacted them or anything like that. It's sad that so many fighters are worried that they're going to get the UFC upset. You got to remember, the UFC agreed to the settlement. It's their idea of the settlement. They want to settle this case. You not collecting your claim does not make them happy. They're going to spend this. They're going to pay the exact same amount of money out if you accept it or not. So I would recommend getting your money out of the settlement, because if you don't, the other fighters will just get to split what was going to be your claim. So you are not making the UFC happy. And I've heard stories. This is kind of just mind-boggling to me. Her problem she's talking about is current fighters in the UFC that are part of the league class. In other words, the fighters that fought from 2011 to mid 2017 in the UFC, that they're worried that the UFC will be upset with them and give them bad matchups. Again, the UFC doesn't care because they're going to pay the money anyways. But I've heard from fighters that are in the league class and no longer fighting that are worried that maybe they should ask the UFC if it's okay to take it. And that's kind of disturbing. And I guess, and I joked a little bit about this, but it's true. I think nothing says you have market power more than everybody's terrified of doing anything that might upset you who's in the market, right? I think this is a perfect example. That's how much control they have over the market. But I'm telling you, if you're a fighter, the UFC doesn't care that you're collecting this because they're going to pay no matter what. And they're the ones that want to do the settlement and want to pay this to get this case out of their hair. And also, there's another point that was made is a manager tweeted or X'd or whatever the frick we call it now, Eric McGracken, when he brought up Rose's complaint that a lot of fighters don't know who she is and they're telling her to contact their managers. Now, okay, I can understand that. These fighters are not aware who she is. They get nervous being taken advantage of. Fair enough. But I guess I would say I don't understand why the managers don't tell them these people are legit or I'm aware of the website. Go to UFCclassaction.com. Now, you might be a great manager. You might not be looking to rip off the fighters. But you can understand why the plaintiff's attorneys don't want to go through the managers, I hope, right?
Yeah.
And the reason they don't want to is because so many managers, we're already aware of this, we're pretty sure are going to ask for a cut of it to do the legwork for the fighter. The simple legwork of filling out the 5 sections of the form and sending it back.
Isn't it fair to say that the reason why Rose Gracie is the one that's doing the Fighters Foundation is because she's a Gracie? And because that name is kind of synonymous with fighting in Brazil?
Yeah, they're using her because she's a Gracie. She's well known in the Brazilian camps. She has contacts, things like that.
I mean, I've known Rose Gracie for almost 20 years. So, I mean, she's been entrenched in this community forever.
But even, okay, let's say you don't want to go through a third party like they're using her. Well, you can contact the attorneys directly. Remember, we did an interview with them. They said, get a hold of us. You can contact Rob Macy. Repeatedly says, contact me. Rob Macy, you can find him. I probably can Google him and you can get all the information you need. He's on Twitter. You can DM him or the MMAFA, the organization he founded. They will answer any questions. If you're a manager and have questions on behalf of your fighters, right, you can talk to him and he will direct you. One thing, though, I think the plaintiffs are not going to do, they're not going to talk only through a third party and not the fighter. They want to talk directly to the fighter. And that's what gets me a little nervous about some of these people. It's my job to represent my fighter. That's great. But in this situation, you should understand that the plaintiff's attorneys are a little worried that managers and third parties and lawyers are going to just want to chisel off a piece of the settlement without really doing anything. And so they want to speak directly to the fighter. And I think that's understandable. They'd want to do that. So if you're a fighter, if you know fighters, tell them just to go to UFCClassAction.com, fill out the form that's on there so they can get contacted and so that they do not miss a chance to get their claim, because it is going to be incredibly sad that we'll probably end up with a number of fighters that don't file because they're not aware of it. Don't file because they're nervous, because they're always paranoid who's doing these things. Don't file because they're worried they're going to get the UFC upset. Or if they do file a claim, they're going to end up paying a big chunk to some third party that did very little amount of work on it. And so that's going to be sad. And you know who's not going to care? The UFC, because they're paying the same amount out no matter what.
One last thing on this. For those of you out there, you fighters that might be wondering about this, if you don't take your settlement, the UFC doesn't get that money back. It goes back into the pool and it's distributed amongst the rest of the fighters. Correct?
Exactly. So, I mean, maybe if there's a fighter out there telling everybody not to send in a form because he's secretly trying to increase the pool for himself. But you should make contact with them, the plaintiffs. You should get your form, your name. I mean, that's the other thing. My understanding is they're inundated with people filling out forms. Not all of them fighters. Not all the fighters are filling out all the information. So you want to make sure they have that information so they can get a hold of you and give you your claim. And I mean, I don't know what more to say. And I know there's fighters that listen to this because I get emails and DMs and stuff from fighters. So I would just say spread the news. I think the best thing that would happen what would be really good, actually, and maybe someone who has a direct line is get Ariel Helwani to talk about this. I know he has a large number of fighters that listen to it. That would be one good thing. But even better would be get Joe Rogan. If someone can get Joe Rogan to talk about this just briefly on a show, because I think that would be the best thing to dispel the fear that a lot of fighters have about potentially crossing the UFC. And they're not crossing the UFC again because the UFC wants the settlement done.
I don't think Joe Rogan would do it. Call me crazy, but I don't think Joe Rogan would do it. I think Ariel would, though.
Oh, sure. I'm sure Ariel would want. In fact, maybe I'll send him a message that you should do this. But Joe Rogan, he has the biggest reach, very popular. He would make the biggest dent on fighters, I think, that getting the news out there for them.
It would make a lot of sense if he did, but I doubt it. All right. So, one more time to reiterate, if you're thinking that the UFC is going to get mad at you for taking what's legally owed to you, don't be nervous, because if you don't take it, goes back in the pool. That does not go back to them. So you're doing them no favors by not taking your settlement money. All right. Now, let's get into it. UFC announced that they had a sellout crowd and a gate of 16.6 million. Is this a good or a bad number for them?
Well, I mean, it seems obvious that it's a good number because this is the fourth or fifth highest gate of UFC history. So it's a very large gate for UFC. So you think this is great. But if people remember, last year, this same fight was booked in Madison Square Garden right around the same time. And we had a roving reporter, gate specialist Fred Garvin tracking the gate back then, plus other people as well, because the ticket prices. And if you totaled up the stadium, what the ticket prices were set back then, which were higher than what this event was, the gate would have been over 30 million, and it was selling pretty rapidly. So we would imagine the gate would have been in the 20 millions, maybe the upper 20 millions, maybe not full sell at 30 million. So in some ways, this is, yes, it's a successful event compared to other UFC events, but compared to what I think the momentum of this event had last year, the interest level, because it also, I mean, just based on my interactions, on Twitter and looking at kind of traffic on certain things and talking to other people in the media, it did not seem as there was as much interest this time as when it was booked last year. So I think I'm not saying it did bad. It did well for the UFC. It did good. But in some ways, this is like when Canelo finally fought Triple G for the third fight. The momentum was gone at that point.
Trent Reinsmith put out something this morning that said that there were seats available yesterday, just an hour before, I believe is what he said, very shortly before the event started. And there were floor seats at 1,600 and the cage side seats at 7,800 that were still available. So my question for you is, can they really claim a sellout when there were seats available shortly before the event?
I think it's like Zach Arnold pointed out in his article. It's like the old pro wrestling or Japanese MMA trick. When you get over 90% tickets sold, it's a sellout. And I'm sure maybe they just, they handed out tickets for fillers and they had the number of people there. But yeah, it does not sound like it was a legitimate sellout. There were tickets available up to the end, but close enough. Like what is it? WrestleMania 3, 93,000. Let's say it.
All right. Now, in the post-fight presser, Dana White said that Jon Jones made a lot of money for this fight and for his career. Now, you have been keeping track of stuff like this for almost 20 years. So what are your estimates for what he made, and how did you come up with those numbers? To access the bonus content of this episode, you must be a paid subscriber. To do that, go to heynottheface.substack.com and subscribe today.
Ow! Ow! Not the face! Ooh! Ooh! Okay, the face!